Hello, my name is Frank Caputo, and welcome to Health Comes to Mind. This will be a series of 6 programs which will address various areas that will hopefully explain that there is a connection between the mind and the body, which for a long time in Western medicine wasn't recognized, but is now. And over this period of time, hopefully we'll be able to supply you with some information that will allow you to realize that there is a connection and things that you might be able to do to assist you in areas such as addiction, relationships, physical illness. We thank you very much for being here, and we look forward to spending some time with you in the next 6 weeks. Thank you very much. Good evening. I'm Frank Caputo. Welcome to Health Comes to Mind. My guest tonight is Dr. Margot Main, and I will read her curriculum for you. Margot is a co-founder of Main and Weinstein Specialty Group. She's a clinical psychologist who has specialized in eating disorders and related issues for over 30 years. Margot is a author of many books on the subject of eating disorders, which we have some here tonight. She has a private practice and also is affiliated with the staff of Institute of Living and Connecticut Children's Medical Center. Tonight we want to talk about eating disorders, and I'm going to ask Margot a few things, and she can fill us in on some of the misconceptions that people may have about eating disorders and also what may be true about that. So, Margot, if you don't mind. I'd like to ask you a little bit about eating disorders. I mean, we think of eating disorders. Oh, a skinny person must have an eating disorder, yeah. Okay? What exactly does it mean to have an eating disorder?
Well, eating disorders come in all shapes and sizes, and I think when you say the word eating disorder, people think of a young woman. Mm-hmm. They usually think of a young white woman, mm-hmm. and they usually think of anorexia. And that is one of the eating disorders. It's a very serious eating disorder. It's one that really requires treatment and a lot of attention in our educational system, our medical system, our mental health care system. But it's not the only eating disorder. And in fact, it is the least common of all the eating disorders. Really? Right. It is the easiest one to spot because when someone has anorexia, they lose a significant amount of weight and they don't look well and their energy changes and all of that. But people with bulimia are just as ill from a medical point of view and sometimes from a psychiatric point of view, and they may not be at a critical weight, so you might not see that. The largest category of eating disorders is actually called eating disorders not otherwise specified, and that means people who might have some of the symptoms of anorexia and might have some of the symptoms of bulimia, but don't meet the criteria for one or the other. Or they also might have something like binge eating disorder. And in reality, somewhere between 50 and 70% of the cases of eating disorders fall in that category. So, you know, we think eating disorder, we think anorexia, we think young white woman, and that's not the case. The other thing is that eating disorders come in all different ages. We are also seeing more men, we see more children. Sometimes in my office, when you look out in the waiting room, it looks like a pediatric office. And we also see eating disorders in adult women quite a bit, and that's one of the areas that I've been concerned about. We see it across ethnicity, across race, across socioeconomic status, and now with the impact of globalization and westernization, we see eating disorders in over 40 countries worldwide. So when I first started, you mentioned I've been doing this for over 30 years, it was the advanced technological nations like the United States, like Canada, like some of the European countries. But now we see it even in underdeveloped countries.
Because they are seeing images of what we think are ideal people here, so they feel that I'm going to do that too, and I have to get to look that way.
Yeah, there was a very interesting study done, let's see, in the mid-90s by a researcher from the Harvard system, Ann Becker. She's a psychiatrist and a cultural anthropologist, a brilliant and wonderful woman, who happened to be studying in Fiji at the time that Western television was introduced. They hadn't had much access to electricity till the mid-90s, and now they did, and Western TV shows were going to be available to people. Before Western TV was part of their lives, no women talked about dieting or body image. They liked their bodies. Having a big body was actually seen as a good thing because you could do what you needed to do in a subsistence culture. And food was celebrated because there were times when they don't have food. So when you do have food, it's a great thing. What happened within 3 years after Western television was introduced, and it was not very much because not everybody had TVs in their home, but within 3 years they had a significant number of women dieting, unhappy with their bodies, and even having clinical eating disorders. As many as 10% could have been diagnosed with eating disorders within 3 years. So we can see the impact of culture on people's attitudes towards their bodies, towards food, etc. When the researchers, Dr. Becker and other researchers, interviewed the women to find out what about being thin, what about dieting appealed to them, women talked about wanting the power that they saw these thin women having. So it wasn't the body per se, it's everything that comes with the body. And that's the case for all people who end up being drawn into eating disorders. They want to have the power and the influence that they see the idealized female form has in our culture, which is based on a lot of media images and
It's true.
Yeah.
I have to just maybe digress for a second.
Sure.
I remember you saying, you know, how you look makes you powerful and so on and so forth. I remember an old Saturday Night Live routine where Billy Crystal did the thing about Fernando. It doesn't make any difference if you feel good as long as you look good. and I think a lot of people truly do believe that. You know,
well, we're
the
taught
image
to
thing.
believe that.
Yeah.
And, you know, we are a culture where appearance is very, very, very important, especially for women. And women never get the message from the time they're, you know, an infant onward, that there is anything that they should accept about their bodies. We should always be changing our bodies. We should be dieting. We should be changing facial features. We should get cosmetic plastic surgery. We should have, you know, undergarments that change our body shape. Diet pills, laxatives, different color contact lens. There's nothing about you that you can't change. And a lot of money is made off making women uncomfortable with their bodies.
So they're basically trying to do something to please someone else, whether it be, you know, their family or whether it be the culture itself. I'm trying to please you, so I have to look good to do this. And it's a drive in them that would perhaps, you know, initiate the things that happen with anorexia or bulimia or these things. Or
Well, eating disorders are multi-determined. They're really, really, really complicated. And one of the things that we see is that a lot of people who develop eating disorders have a particular personality style where they're perfectionistic, they never feel good enough about themselves, they're people pleasers, so their locus of control is more outside than inside. And when they're having difficult times in their lives, it's a time when they are going to be more attuned to what other people want from them and what they should be like in our culture. So the peak times for people to develop eating disorders are during adolescence, when there's a lot of change happening in your life and you're starting to tune into what other people want from you. You're a little bit less grounded in your family. The culture is more important.
when you start to, you know, get on your own.
Right.
We're going to break for a moment, and we can pick up on this. I want to ask you something about some statistics and that type of thing, but thanks. We're going to take a brief break.
Thank
I'm
you.
going to go out and get something to eat. No.
Enjoy
Thank
it.
you. Okay.
Am I pretty enough to be noticed? Will they love me if I go on a diet?
Why do girls need to be skinny?
Will my freckles go away?
Do I need liposuction? Do I need a boob job?
Do you think I'm fat?
Do you think I'm fat? Do you think I'm fat?
explore new worlds. Read. Visit literacy.gov.
Welcome back. Dr. Main and I were talking a little bit during the break, and one of the points that I noticed in some of her literature is that Mother Nature, doesn't want us to fool with the way our bodies are growing, and there's some very interesting facts in here. And since Dr. Main knows more about the facts than I do, you want to take them, Margot, as to why women's bodies change, and men's also?
Yeah. Well, this is really interesting material that a lot of people don't understand. Even a lot of medical people don't understand. But our bodies, particularly women's bodies, are really programmed for survival. And there are reasons why women gain weight as they get older. Women have to start gaining weight to go through adolescence, to go through puberty. They have to increase the volume of fat on their bodies. So before puberty, most girls have about 12% of their body is composed of by fat. And in order to get her first period, that number generally gets to be about 17%. So her body fat composition at menarche, when she first gets her period, is going to be about 17%. But for a woman to have regular periods on a regular basis, her body fat needs to be about 22%. And that's significantly more than when she's a little girl. So what happens for girls as they're going through adolescence is they're starting to hear a lot more about dieting, and they're starting to see the images in the media that are so thin, and they're thinking they should be like that, but their bodies are gaining weight. And between the ages of like 10 and 14, before puberty, into puberty, most girls, the average girl will gain between 40 and 50 pounds and between 8 and 10 inches of height. That's just a natural thing that's supposed to happen for her. So her body actually can almost double or triple in size, pending where she is on the growth chart. That's a natural process to get her into adolescence and to get her into childbearing years. So 22% of her body needs to be fat in order to have a regular period. What that means, and this is really magical, a woman who has 22% body fat can actually survive a famine for 9 months. Think about that. 9 months is the gestation of a baby. So the future of the human race is based on a woman having 22% body fat.
Is that the same? Excuse me. Is that BMI? Is that body mass index? Is that the same, or whatever?
No, body mass index is a whole different thing.
Okay, I'm
yeah,
sorry.
that has really not much research base. It's kind of a statistic that really isn't very relevant.
Okay, good.
But so a woman needs fat in order to survive, but she also needs fat in order for the human race to survive. Yeah.
That's interesting.
And what that means also is that men have less body fat in order to be healthy. They don't need to have as much. The average man needs more like 15 to 20% body fat versus a woman needs 20 to 25%. If we go through a famine, only 10% of women will die, whereas 50% of men will die. So this is about basic survival, and it's about the survival of the human race. When women go through menopause, there's another set of changes that happen for them, and that is that their metabolism slow down a little bit, and they tend to gain some weight, and the average is 8 to 12 pounds. And generally, around their middle, they start to gain their weight there. What happens is the fat cells around that part of their body expand. They don't multiply, but they expand in order to produce some estrogen to offset the loss of estrogen as your ovaries begin to shut down. And by producing estrogen, it actually keeps women from some of the side effects of menopause. She'll be less likely to develop osteoporosis. She might have less hot flashes and other issues that are the symptoms of menopause. So unfortunately, a lot of women are dieting a lot as they go through menopause because they don't want to gain that weight, and they end up with worse menopause symptoms.
But they want to look good.
But they want to look good. And I think that's a part of this, we've been talking about the spectrum of eating disorders, and one of the things I'm very concerned about is that we help adult women identify their problems and help the medical system identify that a lot of adult women are struggling with disordered eating and eating disorders. And it's partially because we are so phobic of getting older in our culture. We're a youth-oriented culture, but we especially don't respect and honor older women. So a woman who's 45 and 50 going through menopause really feels tremendous pressure to look like she's 25. And she'll do a lot of things that will mess up that natural process that I was talking about before.
That's very interesting, because from the other side of this coin, I'm a man, and
Yep.
I'm looking at women and so on and so forth. I'm looking at women, they're there.
Yep.
But we, I think, as men, put pressure on people, on women to be this perfect person, and if your significant other or your wife, whatever, is starting to put a little bit around the middle, that reflects on you. Gee, why can't you look as nice as so and so over here, right? And that type of thing, and I'm sure they're getting pressure to do that too, not realizing out there, guys, that there's a difference between them and us. Okay, as you say.
Well, I think the media images affect men also. There are studies that tell us that men, after they look at magazines with models in them, criticize their female partners much more than before. So I think that's a real factor. And for a lot of women, male approval is a really, really big thing. And what I see in a lot of families that I treat is that the fathers may be trying to give their daughters really good messages as they go through adolescence. They know they need to do that, but they're being very critical of their wives as their wives go through the natural process of aging. And the girl hears that, and that's very confusing.
That's right.
It's actually healthier for a woman to be a little bit higher in weight than to be average weight or underweight. And that's the same for men as well.
Right.
It is only extremely high or extremely low weight that puts somebody at risk medically.
Right, right. That's really interesting, because there's a reason for all these things. It's kind of like, in the other part of it, the fight or flight, situation. The same kind of a thing. You're going to do one or you're going to do the other thing, and you have to have this in order to survive, and it's a benefit to have a little, what do they call it now? Now they call it muffin tops now. It's like, come up with a new name for everything. Muffin tops used to be whatever, handles or something. I don't know. But we have that. The media and images has an awful lot to do with this. Even though your body is saying, no, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do this. The same in addictions. If you're not out there with a bunch of people drinking Budweisers on a beach, then you're not having fun. So you better drink Budweiser and do your, take care of it. So then you become an alcoholic, and you say, oh, I don't know why I did this.
And if you're a woman, you better be thin while you're drinking
That's
the Budweiser.
absolutely, that's correct. While you're hitting that volleyball back and forth, and they all are, isn't it? Isn't it? Yes. So I guess our idea is to please others and be like others because we think we're going to feel better, makes us do things to our body that are not required by nature or would be beneficial to us.
Yeah, and I think today, whether you're 8 or 18 or 25 or 50, we are constantly bombarded by messages from the outside. This social media that we have, the fashion industry, magazines, billboards, everywhere we go, there are images of what we should be looking like. And none of us look that way. We used to say only 1% or 3% of women can look like those fashion models. Well, in reality, no one can look like them because they are an odd group of people in terms of their body type. They're not a normal group. They are at one extreme in terms of their weight. And then they are manipulated by computer images and software to look very different from their natural bodies. There's a lot of models who don't even recognize themselves in ads.
What you're seeing isn't real anyway.
Right, exactly. And we never escape that today. And we also are living at a time when success and competition is totally out of control. So I think people are really struggling to find something that's going to make them be seen as better and successful. And for women, it's getting that perfect body. So she has to do everything else, but she also has to have that perfect body.
We'll take another break. What I want to do is, the last session is I want to talk a little bit about your books and kind of tell us what treatment options are for this.
Great.
cancer.
Am I pretty enough to be noticed? Will they love me if I go on a diet?
Why do girls need to be skinny?
Will my freckles go away?
Do I need liposuction? Do I need a boob job?
Do you think I'm fat?
Do you think I'm fat? Do you think I'm fat?
For our last segment of the show, I'd like Dr. Main to show us, she brought a few of her books here tonight, just try to let us know what they were and hold them up to the camera or whatever they'll do. We've got pictures of them later if you like. Can you tell us about some of the books you've written?
Sure. One of the books that is the most relevant to some of the things we've been talking about tonight is The Body Myth, and this is about the issue of disordered eating and body image issues in adult women, because that's been the forgotten story in eating disorders. There are really a lot of adult women who still suffer from clinical eating disorders, or who have a relapse, or who are, right on the brink of an eating disorder. So this book, I think, tells the story about adult women. It's very, very helpful. It talks a lot about the biology that we were talking about earlier. And educating people about adult women has been a real passion of mine the past few years. The first book I wrote is about fathers and how fathers contribute to girls' feelings about themselves. And dads sometimes don't realize how important they are in a girl's self-esteem, in her feelings about her body, and being able to communicate with men and feel respected by men so that they're less likely to do dangerous things to get men's attention, whether that's, engaging in alcohol or drug use or dangerous dieting to try to get the perfect body. So that's a really wonderful book too, Father Hunger. I wrote a book about body wars, how our culture contributes to women's negative feelings about their bodies, and there's a lot of activism in this book so that people can get ideas of how to change things in their communities or in the culture around them. And then my last two books have been more for the professional audiences. Effective Clinical Practice in the Treatment of Eating Disorders, The Heart of the Matter, talks a lot about the treatment experience and how important it is for the patient to feel respected by the clinician, and for the clinician to really treat the person with this eating disorder as a person, not just a walking, talking eating disorder. And there's chapters on a variety of topics, group therapy, family therapy, a number of topics that are really, really helpful. And that has been a helpful book for people who are training and trying to learn about how to treat eating disorders. And then my most recent book, which was quite a big project, is called Treatment of Eating Disorders, Bridging the Research Practice Gap. In eating disorders, as in many fields, there is a gap between what people are studying in the research lab and writing about in journals and what we actually do in our clinical work. So I gathered about 45 other people in the field, and we've written this book talking about the gap between what we see in the journals and what we see in our offices. So, for example, there's a lot of comorbidity. There's a lot of people with personality disorders or with substance abuse, and those people are not always reflected in the books and journals that we have, and yet that's what we see in our offices. So there's chapters about each of those and many other issues. And I think it's contributed a lot to the literature. It's just come out in the past year. It was a lot of work. I'm not doing another one anytime soon.
I've been working on something for the last year, and I was told, don't sit down and write a book, sit down and write a page, And in a year, you can get a book that's over 300 pages. About 1/3 done. I still got to take some time.
Good.
But this is great, and it feels good to do it too.
Yes.
So now we know the resources that are there as far as literature. We know all those things. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about the treatments? Okay, what we would do if we identified ourselves as having the problem, or if a loved one identified and said, "Why don't you get some help?" What can a person do?
Yep.
What's the treatment?
Well, probably the first thing to do is to go to your medical provider and have a good medical assessment done to be sure that your cardiac system is strong enough that you don't need to be hospitalized, whether your problems are more on the anorexic or on the bulimic spectrum. One of the organs that's hit the hardest by the malnutrition of an eating disorder is the cardiac system. There's other systems as well. It really does affect every system in the body, but we want to be sure that from a cardiac standpoint, the person is strong enough, doesn't need to be hospitalized or medically treated. So the first thing is probably to get into your doctor's office and to talk to your doctor about the local resources. There also is the National Eating Disorders Association, which is www.nationaleatingdisorders.org. has lots of information on their website, and that's a good place to go to get information about how to get help. They have a referral network, and there are people in Connecticut who are on those lists. So the next thing to do is to find a specialist who treats eating disorders, so you can get a good evaluation and know whether your problems are such that you can be treated as an outpatient, or whether you might need to go to a higher level of care, like a residential program or an inpatient program, and get that started. People should expect that treatment is going to take a while. We're not talking about days and weeks, we're talking about months and years. And there was a study a few years ago, which is still the kind of standard, that looked at young women who began being treated for their eating disorders in their adolescence, somewhere between 14 and 18. And 85% of those women got better. But they took between 5 to 7 years to get fully better. So these are not things that go away quickly.
Right. So it's the same thing as with addictions or other behavioral health issues. It's not an event, it's a process.
Exactly, that's a wonderful
way to say it. And it's an
way to
ongoing thing that has to go along. Dr. Main, I really appreciate you being here tonight. This is really good stuff. And maybe we can do something to follow up in the future on this thing too, because I think it's a really important area with the mind and the body connection. And one of the reasons I wanted to have you here is because you can actually see that there's something wrong, whereas sometimes people have other behavioral health issues and it doesn't almost manifest itself in physical symptoms. But this is really great. I thank you so much.
Thank you.
And maybe we can have you back sometime.
That'd be great.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
You have a good time.
Thanks.
Care. Thank
I
you very
appreciate
much.
it.